but it's always a privilege to have the chance to speak at this gathering when I get to. All of you, of course, know that my grandfather was a lifelong Democrat. He was committed to what he understood the party's core values to be, and he understood them to be to protect the rights of the individual citizen and to implement policies that serve the best interests of society as a whole rather than the narrow interest of a favored few. He was deeply grateful to the Democratic Party for supporting his career in public service, which began when he was elected as the representative to the General Assembly from this county in 1922 and ended when he retired from the United States Senate in 1974. He never lost his affection for Burke County, and he never lost his gratitude to the citizens of Burke County for all the opportunities that they gave him over the course of a 5-decade career in public service. He would be deeply, deeply honored that this party continues to honor him some 34 to 35 years after his death by having this dinner. A few members of the family are here. They're all seated down in the front. I guess the law enforcement community wanted to be able to watch everybody simultaneously, but my brother Bob, my niece Cameron, my sister Betsy, my nephew Val, my sister Margaret, the famous one in the family now, Dottie, my cousin Laura, and our cousin Scott, who puts up with us. And we're all deeply grateful to be here. I also want to thank my colleague and my friend Anita Earls for coming to be with us tonight and bring Charles with her. Charles and I have gotten to be good friends, and I was hoping you would come this evening, and I'm glad that you did. You have seen this evening what I have seen in the course of the last year or so as I've gotten to know them. You will never find anybody that has more intelligence. I mean, it's hard for a Harvard Law graduate to say that about a Yale graduate. But I have to because it's the truth. You will never find anybody who works any harder. I'm constantly astounded by what she's looked at that I didn't have time to get to. I'm somewhat mortified by that because I've never been able to outsmart anybody. I've always tried to outwork them, and now I'm getting outworked to death, plus being outsmarted. And I've never met anyone who is more committed to the betterment of the state than Anita is. And I'm grateful to be able to call her my colleague and my friend. And I look forward to continuing to work with her over the course of the coming years. And I'm deeply grateful for her to coming up to Burke County tonight and to speak with us. The reason we call this a response is because Bob and I typically tend to talk about essentially anything we want to talk about, but try to tie it back somehow to Granddad so we could justify the label. There are plenty of people in the room who knew my grandfather. And you know that he would clearly have something to say about the situation in which we find ourselves. I have never been one to try to predict what he would say. However, I'm usually pretty comfortable in looking back on the course of what he did in fact say. And am constantly surprised by how much it relates to things that we see ourselves now. Granddad never claimed to be perfect. The history has not been kind to everything that he ever did in the course of his career. He, as a Presbyterian, like most of the rest of us, understood that all of us were fallible, understood that we were all prone to error, and would, I think, have been the first to admit that he would never have he didn't make every perfect decision in the history of his career. But he did have certain basic beliefs, some of which Anita has alluded to, that I think particularly resonate with us now. Granddad always saw himself primarily as a lawyer. He thought of himself that way. His staff called him judge. They didn't call him senator. They called him judge. His respect for the law bordered on the reverential. His most fundamental belief was that no one was above the law. He had no patience with anyone who felt that they were not bound by constitutional or legal limitations. He described the executive privilege claims that were made in the Nixon administration as poppycock. He believed that Congress, rather than the president, had the power to determine how government money was spent. He was appalled by claims in the Nixon administration that the president, by virtue of the authority of his office, could exempt his subordinates from legal obligations, including those embodied in the criminal law. He recognized that ultimately the law was the only thing that permitted the maintenance of a civilized society, and it prevented a government from becoming autocratic or tyrannical. He also put a premium, and Anita alluded to this a little bit, on truth. He had no patience with people that were not honest. He was committed to the proposition that there were some things that were true, there were some things that were false, that one could tell the difference between the two, and that there was nothing more important than being truthful. He was appalled by the dishonesty and the corruption of the Nixon administration. His distaste for their lack of truthfulness was second only to his distaste for their flouting of the law. But his respect for truth went beyond a respect for basic honesty. He also believed that governmental policy should rest on a sound factual basis. He understood that you could have legitimate factual disputes in trying to make governmental policy. He understood that there were difficult factual decisions that had to be made in deciding what government was going to do. Like the rest of us, he sometimes failed to see that which was obvious. But he deeply believed in the fact that you needed to make your decisions on the basis of factual reality, not on what you thought not on what you thought people would like you to do. Thirdly, he believed in the importance of independent thinking. Those of you who knew him know he always made up his own mind. He was never afraid to be the sole person that espoused whatever position he had. He was not at all afraid to stand alone if standing alone was, in his view, the right thing to do. He did not blindly follow any leader or any political party. He described himself once as having the worst of all afflictions, a Scotch-Irish conscience that did not allow him to run after a multitude to do evil. He recognized that this country is a government of laws and not of men, that no leader is supposed to be all-powerful. We should not blindly follow anybody, and was greatly concerned about political leaders who were unable to brook opposition or treated opposition as tantamount to disloyalty. He refused to kowtow to such leaders himself, and he didn't think anybody else should do so either. His ultimate loyalty was to the Constitution and to the law, rather than to any particular leader. Finally, Granddad believed strongly in the importance of individuals. It's well known he supported individual rights. He believed in freedom of speech even for those people who were speaking things he didn't agree with, which is a fairly rare thing. He spent much of his career defending the rights of others. He started out his career in the legislature in his 20s, opposing a bill that would have banned the teaching of evolution in the public schools in North Carolina. We might have had the Scopes trial in this state if that bill had passed. He defended the presidential candidacy of Al Smith when he was attacked for Catholicism. He defended the free speech rights of Vietnam protesters, even though he was a hawk on Vietnam himself. But he believed his belief in the importance of the individual went beyond his support for individual rights. He was never afraid of a good argument. Those of us who were kin to him knew that he was never afraid to tell us he thought we were wrong. My mother used to be driven nuts by the fact that he would pick arguments at the dinner table and always take the other side from the one that she took just to see what would happen. But he recognized the evil of going beyond legitimate disagreement to the point of abuse. He didn't like intemperance or rudeness. He didn't like name-calling or vituperation. He would have never confused meanness with strength. He saw that kind of attitude as really a sign of weakness and a lack of faith in the American people. He began his career in the Senate by helping to lead the movement to censure Joe McCarthy. And I don't believe he ever changed that. I think Granddad's life and career still speak to us. I think the things that were the most important to him should be important to us as well. The values that he lived off of were more important in many ways than the particular policy positions that he took, which, some haven't stood the test of time, as I said earlier. A couple of decades ago, there was a TV show that some of y'all may have watched. It was put on by a guy named Kenneth Clark. It's called Civilization, which is a rather modest title for something. It had episodes, as I remember, about the arts, science, culture, the history of human civilization as it was understood at that time. It had a lot of viewers. It was well received. At the end of this series, Kenneth Clark summarized his own conclusions in words that I think would have resonated with my grandfather and certainly resonate with me, and I want to close with them. At this point, I reveal myself in my true colors as a stick in the mud. I hold a number of beliefs that have been repudiated by the liveliest intellects of our time. I believe that order is better than chaos, creation better than destruction. I prefer gentleness to violence, forgiveness to vendetta. On the whole, I think knowledge is preferable to ignorance, and I'm sure that human sympathy is more valuable than ideology. I believe that in spite of the recent triumphs of science, men haven't changed that much in the last 2,000 years, and in consequence, we must still try to learn from history. Obviously, you can tell when this was written. History is ourselves. I also hold one or two beliefs that are more difficult to put shortly. For example, I believe in courtesy, the ritual by which we avoid hurting other people's feelings by satisfying our own egos. All living things are our brothers and sisters. Above all, I believe in the God-given genius of certain individuals, and I value a society that makes their existence possible. Again, thank you so much for honoring Granddad again this evening. It's great to be with you. I'm sorry I don't see you as much as I ought to, but I'm a proud native of this county, and I really appreciate all the support that I've gotten from all of you for so many years. Thank you very much.